All right, this is standard 8.1b, part 2. I think that's right. If you clicked on that link, that's where you are. So let's go ahead and talk about it. This is really talking about racism in the North and how it was dealt with in the 1960s. It's a little different than in the South because in the South you have de jure segregation, and if you remember, de jure just means by law. So segregation was the law of the land. White students and black students couldn't go to school together, for example, because the law said so. In the North, that really isn't the case because segregation in the North is de facto. That just means the reality is there was segregation. How do you confront people's feelings? That's a much more complex question to answer. And in the 60s, a number of people felt very frustrated about this. Instead of the peaceful marches and demonstrations you see, you'd actually see things like this. You'd see race riots in the North. One of the most famous happens, and I know this isn't the North, but in California, in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, where part of the city burns for days. This is kind of a problem for the movement because this is the opposite of good press. This is bad press. So people in the North maybe saw what went on in Birmingham with the fire hoses and all that, and they thought, wow, we want to support this movement. But then when they turned on the neighborhood and they saw riots where black people were burning down entire neighborhoods, that made a lot of people in the North not want to support further governmental action towards equality. You say, well, maybe this has gone far enough. Well, out of this, you get a movement called the Black Power movement. And the Black Power movement is frequently misunderstood. A lot of people think that it's basically just we hate white people, we don't like white people. And in reality, the Black Power movement begins with its goal to protect the black community. The idea is if black people work together and either bought things from certain companies or didn't buy from certain companies, that they could work as a unit and accomplish things together. Boycotts, for example. This is the idea that we, black people, didn't want to be told that their history is just, well, you used to be slaves. They say, let's have pride in our culture. We can take this all the way back to some of the great African empires. So they did that. They take pride in their culture. I had a friend after college. I'd go to her house, and very often she'd have a lot of, she was a black girl, and she had a lot of like African tribal pottery and masks and paintings of just tribal sorts of things. This is kind of that idea. It's we should be proud of who we are, and we're more than just former slaves. Now, there is criticism of this because a lot of people say that the Black Power movement is very militant. Some of these people would be willing to fight, and other people said, well, this is just, it's anti-American. I can understand why they would say that. They would say it's anti-American because they're saying you want to look at your roots back in Africa, not in the United States. But let's be honest, the roots of slavery aren't really where I'd want to stop the story if that were me. So I think you can kind of see this both ways. Now, even though that's true, you can see it both ways. There are some groups and some people that take it much, much further. For example, you have Malcolm X. You've got him over on the right. Malcolm X is a leader in a group called the Nation of Islam. These are black Muslims, but it's a particular kind of Muslim. It's not like many of the Muslims you see on the news today. These Muslims actually believed in racial segregation, that white people and black people should be separate, but that they needed to be treated entirely equally. And of course, that wasn't happening. Malcolm X believes that in order to get that kind of equality, people needed to fight. So there's a quote, and I know my video is covering part of it up, but this poster over here on the right says, be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if someone puts his hand on you, send him to the cemetery. Now that really encapsulates exactly what Malcolm X was all about. He was very much more inclined towards violence than what Martin Luther King was. He does kind of soften a little bit at the end of his life. He's actually killed by people in the Nation of Islam movement. So that's very sad and very tragic. It would have been great to see if he'd turned around and said, no, let's not be violent. What would have happened? You also get this group that you see down here on the lower left. This is the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers are a group who would put on berets, matching outfits, sometimes military garb, and they would do things like, for example, they felt that their rights to carry a weapon were being taken away in California, so they all carried guns into the Sacramento State House. Well, that's kind of extreme, and a lot of people will see that and be very frightened by it. But that's the kind of thing the Black Panthers would do. You also get people like Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael in particular is a leader in the Black Panthers, and he's definitely a proponent of this idea of black power. So you can see that there's a different side. It's not just all the peaceful civil rights movement, but there were also other people willing to fight and be a little bit more active in creating equality now. Now, the civil rights movement is also going to impact some other groups. In particular, women in the 1960s had been participating in the civil rights movement, and they realized we don't have some of these same freedoms that we want. And so you're going to get organizations created like the National Organization for Women and others that would promote equal rights. Some of these groups are much more liberal, like NOW is a pretty liberal organization. Some are less so. But the idea is we want a world where men and women are treated equally, just like white people and black people. This is, remember, around the same time that the book The Feminine Mystique was written, published by Betty Friedan, or written by Betty Friedan, which says women can do more than just work at home. And so this is part of the one of the ingredients that goes into the mix. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, we've mentioned a couple times, also helps here because it specifically prohibits discrimination against race and religion, but it also says you're protected from discrimination based on your gender, based on your sex. And so this is really a time when people start to say, we can have equality now. Now, you see a couple things come out of this. One of the court cases specifically that results is Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade comes out of the women's rights movement because some women start to say, I should have the right to choose what to do with my own body, and I therefore want to be able to have legal abortions. Other people say, no, it's not your own body, this is a baby. And so this is why we have this debate today. But it's the women's rights movement that this court case has its roots in. Okay. Without the women's rights movement and organizations like NOW, you would not currently have legal abortion in the United States. Let me pause that for you. There's also an amendment that's proposed in the U.S. called the Equal Rights Amendment that doesn't get passed, but what it suggested was just this. You can really read Section 1. It says, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Doesn't seem incredibly controversial, but it is debated, it is fought, and it is shot down. So you can see that there is definitely some pushback to the women's rights movement. Finally, you've also got Latinos and Native Americans who also identify the need for freedom and equality. So these guys copy the African American civil rights movement, but both of them turn more militant. They pick up guns and they end up, at least the Native Americans end up firing on some federal agents. So people as a whole look at this and aren't supportive of that kind of thing. You can see that the civil rights movement for African Americans has a ripple effect in other parts of American culture. That is standard 8.1b. Let me know if you have any questions. Shoot me an email. I hope this helps. Bye.